George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows, coming to you live from Moscow, the greatest capital city in the world. Not my words, the words of Errol Musk, the father of Elon Musk, in which he adumbrated the greatness of this city. I'll be talking to him later here on the mother of all talk shows. A mighty oak has fallen in the California woodlands, where Brian Wilson, the greatest musical genius of American popular music over the last more than half a century, has passed away at the age of 82. And Tulsi Gabbard reminded us today what we should never have forgotten: the sheer horror, existential disaster of nuclear weapons. On the bright side, Donald Trump and Elon Musk appear to have kissed and made up, and America and China appear to have made a trade deal. We'll be diving more deeply into these matters with our excellent guests here this evening from Moscow. It is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
If you are a baby boomer, you already know the importance of Brian Wilson, the importance of the Beach Boys, the importance of Pet Sounds, possibly the greatest musical album ever made. He's up there with Bach, he's up there with Beethoven, maybe not as high as Tchaikovsky, but he is a genius, or rather was, until today when his family announced his passing at the age of 82. Rest in peace, genius Brian Wilson. Tulsi Gabbard did the world a favor today. Visiting Hiroshima, she was, I think, genuinely shaken to her core at the reminders that are still there in that Japanese city, in the shadows on the walls where once there were human beings, where the grandchildren of those who perished gave testimony. It chilled her blood. It chilled her to the bone. And she was not shy in telling us what once upon a time was a commonplace amongst people of my age. Everybody knew the catastrophic consequences of nuclear war. But she said an important thing. She said those who incite conflict between nuclear powers are enemies of humanity. She's predictably being denounced as a Putin apologist. Anyone who speaks common sense in this crazy world is denounced as a Putin apologist. But I remind you, she's the director of national intelligence in the White House to President Donald Trump. And of course, we know who these people are that are inciting conflict between nuclear armed powers, superpowers even. And they are truly the enemies of humanity. Tulsi Gabbard was reminded of what happens with the devastation of a nuclear weapon 1,000 times less powerful than the nuclear weapons that are in profusion in the possession of a small number of countries today. 1,000 times more powerful are the thousands of nuclear weapons that would be unleashed in the event of a nuclear conflagration. Some of you seem to be lingering under the misapprehension that a war between two nuclear powers would remain conventional. But this is just about as stupid an idea as you have ever held. If one or the other of the nuclear-armed powers began to lose the conventional war, what do you think they're going to do? Hands up, hands over the keys to our nuclear arsenal, or are they going to escalate that conventional conflict first to battlefield nuclear weapons, then to intermediate range nuclear weapons, that is to say France, Paris, London, etc., and then, if necessary, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are hypersonic in character, which cannot be shot down, which cannot be called back, and which would end life on the planet. 99% of the population, however deep was their nuclear bunker, in the affected countries would be destroyed. First by the blast. Luckily, if you're hit first by the blast. As Khrushchev famously said, in the event of a nuclear war, the living will envy the dead because of the sheer horror of the aftermath. The blast, followed by the nuclear fallout, the radiation, which would strike everyone with leukemia and other cancers almost instantly. And then the nuclear winter. The cloud of ash that would blot out the sun for decades, if not centuries, would lead to mass famine. 5 billion people in the world would die of famine in the aftermath of a nuclear war, even where their country was not itself struck, was not itself affected directly by the nuclear blast. 5 billion people would die of famine. Nothing would grow. No heart would beat. No wings would beat. No plant, animal, or human being would remain alive in the event of a nuclear war. And yet, there are still those who are inciting nuclear powers to go to war with each other. Some of these inciters are yapping chihuahuas like the village states known as the Baltic republics, Lithuania, etc., constantly provoking their gigantic neighbor with all of its nuclear armory, calling for war, pushing, instigating, all the time inciting a nuclear confrontation between NATO and the Russian Federation. But countries like Germany, like France, like Britain, they are inciters also. Someone said to me the other day that I keep making the mistake of underestimating British military potential. I laughed, knowing as I do that the entire armed forces of my own country, Navy, Air Force, and Army, could comfortably fit in to a mid-table football stadium in England. They said, but we've got nuclear weapons. But of course, as soon as we fired our nuclear weapons, we'd be hit by 10, 20 nuclear weapons in response, and our country would be turned to ash. It would be an act of national suicide. And that makes you feel secure? That makes you feel brave, Starmer, Lammy, Healy? I know you don't know who Healy is. He's the great British war leader, an inky-fingered clerk who's never heard a gun fire in anger in his entire life. These inciters are trying to force President Donald Trump against his instincts to join the European powers in a war against Russia. And if they were to succeed, it is the end. Capital T, capital E. Tulsi Gabbard can see that. In possession of all the intelligence, metaphorically and literally. But these fools, these goons in London and Paris and Berlin, and whatever the capital cities of these little Baltic village states are, I can't be troubled to remember them. These people appear not to know what Tulsi Gabbard knows. The former leader, deputy foreign minister of the Ukraine, told us this morning in the Daily Mail in England, the biggest selling national newspaper, and I quote, "British mothers are going to have to accept that their sons may need to die for Finland." Finland? What's a Finland? Is it a store like Iceland? Is it something you eat, drive, or drink? You think my son's going to die for Finland? You have to be insane to believe that. At least I hope that's the answer of British mothers. We in the anti-war movement, no conscription league, no to NATO, no to war. We in the Workers' Party will work to do everything that we can to stop that from happening. But the public has to rise up and say, enough of this talk. We will not die for Finland, wherever it is, whatever it is. Finland had perfectly good and friendly relations with Russia since the end of the Second World War. Not during the Second World War, of course, because they were on the side of the Nazis. They were enforcing the siege on Leningrad that killed 1 million people who starved to death when there were no more rats and horses left to eat. That was Finland then. But since the end of the Second World War, they had perfectly good relations, normal relations with Russia, a stone's throw away from St. Petersburg, as it is now known. They were pushed to join NATO and immediately made themselves, and are making themselves daily, an enemy of Russia. And we're supposed to send our sons to die there for Finland? Pull the other leg. You have to be having a laugh. This has to be a joke, but alas, it is not a joke. Rutte, the runt of the Netherlands, kicked out by his own people, said this week, you have to double your money or take Russian lessons. You have to pay double on weapons and war what you're currently paying now, or learn Russian. 87% of the people in a poll I saw opted for the Russian language lessons. Double your money in countries that are going down the drain, in countries that are literally falling apart, where the public realm is worse than it was in the last century, where wages are the same as they were almost 20 years ago, where we can't afford schools, hospitals, universities, decent benefits for our poor old age pensioners. You want to double the money on weapons and war? Well, if you agree to that, you deserve everything that is coming to you. Mr. Rutte, of course, is employed in his little onesie to make these kind of constant, aggressive threats against Russia, even though he himself has never fired a gun in anger in his life either. These chicken hawks who've got a nuclear bunker to live out the nuclear winter, should it come. But you don't have a bunker. You will not live out World War III. And the conscripts won't even make it from Aldershot to Poland to join a front line that will very quickly cease to exist. They have provoked endlessly since the 1950s the Ukrainian people to be a knife in the back of the Russian Federation. In 2014, it reached its apogee when this war in Ukraine began. They tell you it started in 2022, but it started in 2014. They have tried everything to force the Ukrainian people, conscripts, swept off the streets by marauding bands of armed thugs working for Zelensky's recruiting sergeants, to force them as the cannon fodder. That's all they are, cannon fodder. Their life expectancy is sometimes measured in days, not even weeks, to try to weaken and divide the Russian Federation, and if possible to change its regime and the role that that regime plays in the world. The Ukrainians have paid a terrible price in blood. The rest of us have paid a terrible price in treasure, and we are committed for 100 years in Britain to going on paying that price. We'll be talking about all these things with our expert guests later in the show. Let me turn, if I may, my attention to a woman called Rimahassan. If you don't know who she is, that's because the Western media are deliberately avoiding telling you who she is. She's a member of the European Parliament, a French member of the European Parliament. But tonight she's in solitary confinement in a dungeon in Israel, having been subjected, along with Greta Thunberg and others, Thiagoavila and many others, who were kidnapped on the high seas in international waters, completely illegally, an act of piracy worthy of any Somali warlord pirate, by Israeli commandos, and taken under arms to the port of Ashdod in Israel, and thence to various dungeons. Some, like Greta, signed the papers for an immediate deportation to Paris, as it happened in Greta's case. But Rima's made of sterner stuff. She is a Palestinian. She was kidnapped on her way to her own country. She is a member of the European Parliament, and the European Parliament has done jack shit to get her out of that dungeon, where she's now on hunger strike. What is the point of a parliament that won't even do anything to release a member of their own parliament, a parliamentary colleague, from illegal incarceration in a dungeon in Israel, a country that the European Union bends over backwards, forwards again in triplicate to do everything that they can to make life easier for the apartheid state in Israel? What kind of France do we have, where the president of France is not immediately on the phone to Netanyahu demanding the immediate release of his own citizen, an elected member of the European Parliament? Is this really France that we have today? Is Macron really the president? Is this the man that succeeded de Gaulle, General de Gaulle, to Emmanuel Macron? Do you think General de Gaulle would have tolerated such a thing? You think Mitterrand would have tolerated it? You think Chirac would have tolerated it? They'd have been out toot sweet pretty damn quick. But the French government is doing nothing to release their own member of the European Parliament. We'll be talking about all of these things and much more, including an interview with the delightful, exasperating, brilliant Errol Musk, the father of Elon Musk, coming up later in the show. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go ahead, John.
You recognize that, mass immigration is driven by wars, and that ultimately, people ought to be repatriated, and the conditions, and so on need to be laid to facilitate that. But I feel like it doesn't fully address, the concerns of people who are not happy with, like, the exponentially rising levels of immigration. They don't necessarily feel like they have a duty to go about understanding it and wrapping their head around all the complexities of international politics. They just know that they want their country to be, to culturally sort of resemble what their country nominally is. And I suppose it puts you, to some extent, in an inconvenient spot, given, where you found the most political strength and the demographics and so on. But I don't know.
Any spot? No, John. It doesn't put me in any spot at all. And even if it did, you think I would change my answer because it put me in a spot? I say things because I believe that they are right. The issue of immigration and the issue of refugees are not the same thing. And neither of them is the same thing as color, or race, or ethnicity. These are all different things. I was born and grew up before there was mass immigration, and Britain was lousy. It was lousy. All these culture wars have always raged. You just know about them more now. Now, I'm against mass immigration. Nothing to do with color, or race, ethnicity, or culture. It's about economics. The only people who are in favor of mass immigration are lunatic liberals, anarchists, and rich monopoly capitalists. That's obvious, isn't it? So I'm against mass immigration, because in a capitalist society, that can only worsen the terms and conditions of my members, of the working class that I try to represent and champion.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Is immigration out of control? That's tonight's poll, and it's a big one. 22,000 people have voted already, and I'm just now announcing it. Is immigration out of control? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X account, my Twitter account, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. And so far, basically 3/4 of you say immigration is out of control. Frankly, it's a bit of a no-brainer when 1,000 people a day are arriving on the beach in the south of England, and I don't know what the situation is in the United States. Perhaps we'll discuss that later. You may want to control it, make a call about the control of immigration in the United States. I understand that Los Angeles is burning over this very issue right now. Is immigration out of control? Yes or no? If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the United States and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It is free of charge in Britain and Ireland, 08081 965522, and the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Now, my first guest this evening is, frankly, the best known, world famous, independent journalist and geopolitical analyst anywhere on the planet. I keep trying to get him on the show, and now I've got him sitting right next to me at my desk. He is, of course, Pepe Escobar. A lad o' perts, as we say in Scotland, a man of many dimensions. I've just read an article by you quoting Nietzsche, which doesn't happen every day in everyday journalism.
No, it doesn't.
But it's a brilliant quote. There are no facts, only interpretations. The proximate reason for your quoting him was the incredible dedication that governments, parliaments, ministers in the West have to fact-checking, when what we actually know is they are making sure that only one interpretation of the facts, their interpretation, is the one that people are allowed to see. Speak to that first, Pepe, if you will.
Well, George, it's an enormous honor to be with you.
Thank you,
I have admired you for ages. I'm just a pilgrim, and I'm a part of a dying breed. I'm one of the last foreign correspondents active around the world.
It's true.
This year is my 40th year as a foreign correspondent. Wow. Guess where my first post? London.
Was it?
I wanted to be in London when I was very, very young.
40 years ago,
yes.
so that's
it was
85.
Reagan Gorbachev. You remember very well, of course. So can you imagine a young journalist, okay, now I am at the center of the world, because London at the time was part of the center of the world, right? Yeah. So I learned on the way, like, you know, those Chinese, Buddhist, and Taoist pilgrims. You're always learning, you know, and I'm glad that I can show a little bit, especially for younger generations, and talk about these past 40 years, especially what happened. But Nietzsche, it's personal as well. I was supposed to do a PhD on Nietzsche at the Sorbonne in France. And guess what I did? I decided to go to London to see the Clash and the Jam playing live.
That may have been the wisest thing to do.
I think it was a wise decision.
Yes.
But I used Nietzsche because we are in the post-truth era.
Yeah.
As American conceptualizers define it, in fact, the people who used to do critical theory in American universities, now they call everything post-truth. Was postmodernism before, now it's post-truth. And as you mentioned in your introduction, there's only one truth available and imposed and suggested, their truth. So this connects to the fact that there is no truth, only interpretations, but there's only one interpretation now. So the version of post-truth is the version of only one interpretation, their interpretation. If you are a government, if you are an activist, like our friends were at the flotilla that went to Gaza.
Now in the dungeon.
And now they are in a dungeon, including the Brazilian guy, he's a brilliant. Thiago is a brilliant guy.
Wonderful. He's on hunger strike too.
He's on a hunger strike, exactly. So they're not part of the truth, and their interpretation is null and void. And who defines which interpretation is the right one? Essentially governments, NGOs, and large institutions like the European Union, which
NGOs,
you know very well.
which are really GOs, because they're paid by the government.
Paid by governments, exactly. And Kafkaesque institutions like the European Union and European Commission, especially. The European Commission is one of the most nefarious institutions in modern history.
Indeed so.
In fact. And I cannot say pleasure, but I have the displeasure to know many members because some of them were actually my friends. And to give an idea, George, some of my ex-friends, they actually redact Russian sanctions, and they are proud of it. And they advertise that they redact Russian sanctions without knowing anything about Russia on top of that. They are only thinking about their pensions when they retire with a full pension, full salary, no taxes, and they can go to Thailand.
Yeah. We're here, Pepe, in what Musk Sr. Called the greatest capital city in the world.
Correct.
Not by a short distance, but by a mile.
By a mile, yes.
And you and I know that to be true,
yes,
because we're here But of course, the rest of the population is told not to come here, threatened with sanction if they come here, and of course deliberately deceived about what life is like here in Russia for the purposes of the war drive. Now, I was, some may say, a trifle apocalyptic in my monologue, but I was moved to be so by Tulsi Gabbard's experience today at Hiroshima, which she partially passed on to the rest of us, though we could see in her face how badly it had affected her. It is astounding, isn't it, for people your age and mine. We lived in a time where practically everybody knew the horror of potential nuclear war. Now it seems hardly anybody does. They're ready to risk it willy-nilly.
To give an idea, George, I was having dinner with our mutual friend Larry Johnson yesterday night.
Good friend of ours.
Exactly. And we were also discussing the possibility of nuclear war and the possibility of what might lead to nuclear war, which apparently there is now a standing order for a lot of American military bases vis-a-vis a possible attack on Iran. Iran has already said multiple times, if that happens, our response is going to be devastating. It won't be nuclear. They don't even need it. I was in Iran 2 months ago, and we even talked to brigadier general level of the IRGC, and they said, no, we still have a few cards on our sleeve that we haven't demonstrated yet. So this could be even more than Ukraine. Iran could be the stepping stone towards a nuclear conflagration. Because the Israelis are, depending on their Iranian...
threatening it.
Exactly. Let's suppose a plausible chain of events. Nobody wants it, but it's plausible. Trump already told Netanyahu, don't attack Iran because we're trying to get a diplomatic deal. The problem is Netanyahu, as you know very well, is on the ropes now. There's only one way out for him, a war. And guess where? Against the #1 power in West Asia as a whole. So let's say a unilateral attack. By the way, they don't have the weaponry for this unilateral attack. But in desperation, let's assume a unilateral attack. The Iranian response could erase a great deal of Israel, including Dimona. They already said, we will bomb Israel nuclear installations. And Israel's response could be a nuclear attack on Iran. And then all the other major players would be involved, including the US, Russia, of course. Not China, but the US, Russia, and the Europeans, certainly.
And all of the West's allies in the principalities in the Gulf would, of course, be devastated.
Devastated.
By the blast, by the fallout, by the nuclear winter, the American bases in these principalities. It's already stated.
It's already stated by Iran many times, yes.
So even though Trump doesn't seem to want Netanyahu to do this, if Netanyahu does it, it brings Trump in.
Of course. And the overall problem, in fact, we were discussing this with Larry and one of my very well-informed Russian friends yesterday night. We all know that the President of the United States does not rule US foreign policy. You know that very well by your experience. We journalists, we learn along the way, and many of us who live in Washington, we learn when we see how Washington works, right? At the moment, the big question for, let's say, SVR here in Russia, FSB, people of the Russian Security Council, the Russian think tanks, it's still for them, they are obsessed with one question. How come he was bypassed in the drone attack, theoretically only conducted by Kiev against the strategic bombers? It's absolutely impossible, they know that. But they want to establish the chain of command, and they want to establish, was it a CIA silo? Was it an MI6 silo? Was a combination of rogue factions of CIA, MI6 with input from Mossad and then all the way to the SBU? This is what they are analyzing 24/7 for over a week now. And that's why they have been relatively silent. I'm sure you noticed that from the beginning okay, let's wait and see. And that discombobulated the other side completely, because the original idea for this provocation, okay, there's going to be a harsh response, which could even be nuclear, by Russia, and they're going to abandon the table in Istanbul. None of that happened. So their plan collapsed in less than 48 hours. Because the Russians already know what the response will be. But first, as I'm sure you've seen these days you've been here, Putin has to officially transform the SMO into a CTO, a counter-terrorist operation. This has to go through the Duma. The Duma ratifies it. And from then on, it's going to be the Russian Federation against a terrorist rogue regime in Kiev. And then all bets are off. And that's where we're going at the moment.
Yeah, it's Russia Day, as you know, tomorrow.
Russia Day, exactly.
And I think this evening there's a very high-level meeting in the Kremlin.
Very important.
In fact, Putin has moved back into the Kremlin.
Exactly.
And there may be significant developments coming. What's your thoughts on what they might be?
I'm very curious, all of us. Next week on Friday, so Friday afternoon next week, it's going to be the plenary session of the St. Petersburg Forum. And guess who will deliver the address? Putin. And then there's going to be a Q&A. Everybody's waiting for this Q&A because we all know that, the tone of the questions.
I know everybody that you meet here has a view. There are people in Russia, not many, who are ready to say that they're opposed to the war. Mm-hmm. But the main dichotomy is between those who think the war is not being prosecuted harshly enough and those who are ready to trust Putin's judgment and calibration of what level of force and force numbers is required. I feel that I've met, it could just be chance, more people on this visit who think the war is not being prosecuted harshly enough than ever before in all the times I've been here. In fact, people are openly saying to me that this should have all been done in 2014 when the coup occurred and when the Russian people, Russian-speaking people, Russian nationals living in the east of Ukraine were placed in extreme jeopardy, that Russia should have acted in 2014. But that when it did act, it should have ended the war quickly. Rather than Putin says he was naive in believing in the Istanbul process as he had earlier believed in the Minsk
in the Minsk
process.
Exactly.
Well, you can't get away in Russia for that long by saying you were naive. Eventually the people are going to say, stop being naive.
Exactly. And very good point, George. You know that I start spending almost half of the year in Russia in 2023. So this past 2.5 years, I've been here half a year, and this year already almost 3 months. I was listening from the beginning from businessmen, not diplomats or think tanks. This is an almost war. Their own words in Russian. Instant translation to English. Almost war. And you were listening, guys linked to big state companies or big banks, including people who are in Alpha Bank or VTB or Sberbank, executives. And now, as you mentioned, we are beyond the pale. It's bring on the Oreshniks.
That's what they say.
It's changed completely.
Is on everybody's
exactly.
Lips. I was at a table this week with, obviously I can't identify them, but with 3 billionaires, with a minor member of the former royal family here, and with other important Russian personalities, and the word Orishnik was on everybody's lips.
Yes.
For how long are you going to... St. Petersburg today had a drone attack on it. It was shot out of the sky. But what if it had landed on the Hermitage? What if it had landed on a crowd of foreign tourists, which
Yes.
it might well have done?
Yes.
How long are you going to allow Air Force bases to be targeted by these terrorist attacks before you put an end to them? And Russia is perfectly capable of putting an end to them.
They could have done it. In fact, they could have done it from the beginning in 2022. Let's have a diplomatic negotiating process. I was in Istanbul at the time. The Turks we did it. They have a deal. It lasted, as you remember, a few hours, right? Medinsky said something extraordinary.
He's the chief Russian negotiator.
Chief Russian negotiator. He's a historian. He's an extremely well-prepared diplomat, historian and diplomat. He said something extraordinary. Look, at the time we were telling them, look, why don't you be like Austria? You can have an army, but you can be like Austria. You can be semi-neutral or neutral. It's the best deal for you. This was in the first negotiation, the Istanbul negotiation. And he compared the demeanor of the team, the Ukrainian team at the time, in 2022 with what's been happening this past few weeks. Basically, he was saying, now they look scared. Or they're saying, look, you have one boss, I have three. So this means, I cannot tell you anything. You know, I have to clear with three different instances. And they know that the next deal, the next offer is going to be devastating. Like Medinsky let it know in the first Istanbul meeting, it's not going to be 4 regions, it's going to be 8.
Yeah.
And that's where they're going. And when you compare to, just one second, George, when you compare with what the commanders are saying on the ground, I'll give you an example. For our audience, it's important for perspective. I was in Donbass in February, and we were going towards Ugledar, which had been liberated in September last year. So one of the commanders are saying, do you see those planes going west over there? That's where we're going. And it's not going to be very difficult for us. You know where we're going to be in summer? Dnipropetrovsk. Guess where they are now, George? They are on the borders of Dnipropetrovsk.
Well, they're about to take Sumy itself.
Take Sumy,
from
yes.
whence the Kursk incursion was organized. And that's 200 miles from Kiev itself.
Exactly, it's very close. Exactly. And the rationale now totally, it's completely different. Oh, we will keep advancing. When you have Lavrov saying on the record, I would say for a few months now, including this roundtable we had in the beginning of the week here, where you were on the panel, it will be decided in the battlefield. And now this is the number one priority for Russia. The second priority will be this ersatz negotiation with the Americans, because they don't exactly know what Trump wants, thinks, or if he's going to change his mind tomorrow, or what narrative he's going to change.
He's going to change his mind in the next hour.
In the next hour,
I mean,
literally, yes.
They were literally throwing bombs at not literally, but almost throwing bombs at each other, Musk and Trump, just a couple of days ago. Tonight, they've kissed and are making up.
They're making up.
I mean, it's a perfect picture of how unpredictable the American administration is. And unpredictability is a danger at the top of a nuclear armed
Yeah, but the
superpower.
Russians look at all that like they are monks, no?
Yeah.
Impassible. Nothing distracts them from their ultimate goal.
That's a fact. Pepe Escobar, a real pleasure.
Enormous
Privilege
pleasure, George.
to be
Thank
with
you.
Thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
us. It is the mother of all talk shows. Let me take a quick break and then your calls coming next. Stay tuned.
What a great show this is! I listened to it, I thought, wow, what a great show. I've called into your show today, George, because I'm a great caller. Probably the greatest caller you've ever had. I really am. The only way your show could be better is if it had more of me, Donald J. Trump, in it. You keep talking about me, George. You do. I've heard it. I have. So many of the American people, the best people, listen to your show. And I've heard them crying about me. I have. And I listen and I go, ooh, America, don't cry. Don't cry. You need to be careful what you say about me, George. You don't want me to put a tariff on your show like I did with China. And then you'll come running for my help, just like little Zelensky. You know, I know you will. I know these things. Make the mother of all talk shows great again. That's why we're here. That's what we're gonna do, George. We're gonna boost your ratings. Donald is gonna boost them bigly. I'm giving your show the Trump bump. You're welcome, George. Thank me. And remember, nobody talks like me. Nobody calls like me. And absolutely nobody ends a phone call like me. I'm hanging up now. Not because I finished, but because I won.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
How brilliant is that Donald Trump impersonation? Absolutely outstanding. Is immigration out of control? Almost 25,000 people have voted now, and it's overwhelmingly, still 3/4 believe that immigration is out of control. Coming up later in the show is Errol Musk, businessman, politician, and patriarch of the Musk family. But first, let's go to Chicago and hear what Clayton has to say about Greta Thunberg. Clayton, welcome to the show.
Hey, George, big fan of yours and Roger Waters. Some of you guys in England know what you're talking about. I'm in Chicago.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, I hope Greta's safe and she's back in Sweden. But I was wondering if you knew about the speech Benjamin Freeman gave at the Willard Hotel about the Balfour Declaration. Is it true after World War I, Germany wanted peace, but
no,
that's not true then? I thought World War I, Germany wanted peace.
No, I don't know. I don't know. But well, after World War I, Germany was entirely defeated. The Treaty of Versailles imposed condign punishment on it. They went through a period of prosperity and then the crash. And that crash in 1929 ushered in the conditions for the rise of German fascism. I'm not aware that at any time prior to the rise of Hitler that Germany had any particular role in the Balfour Declaration or Palestine. But if you know different, tell us now, please.
England to fight against Germany, and Germany already wanted peace, so they escalated World War I again. If you listen to Benjamin Freeman's speech in the Willard Hotel, 1916, you can hear it all the way through. He was a former Jew. He's just really honest about it. A lot of people aren't aware of it, and I try to explain it to people.
You're talking about World War I. World War I was an imperial clash between people who were in fact related by blood. They could have settled it all around the Christmas dinner table at Sandringham. They were all grandsons of Queen Victoria. The imperial clash was largely over Africa, but over colonies in general. The German royal family, though Germany had only existed for less than 50 years at that time, were demanding a bigger share of the pie. The other royals, the other imperial powers, were not prepared to wear it. If your point is that Germany was the peace-loving power in that rivalry, I simply don't accept it. But thanks for the call in any case. On YouTube, you can scan the QR code now and you can leave a comment on the YouTube stream. Keep it clean and I'll try and read it out here on the mother of all talk shows, like this one from Antonio Cristoforo. Starmer's imagination is out of control. if he thinks he can take on Russia and Putin and win. Imagine a world without London. Not hard with Starmer in charge. Grazia Nalu says Rutte is banking on the natural resources in Ukraine that they will plunder after the conflict. Hence, he wants the war to go on. Anthony Wedgwood says this piracy is probably the smallest crime the Israeli government has committed over the past 77 years. And Grazia says the French government is known to be brutal and still colonial to people who are not white. And Nikki A says, why is it okay for white Europeans, US citizens, Israelis to go and live and occupy other people's countries without anyone questioning them, without permission, and when asked to leave, they refuse? Adnan is in England, in Stoke, wants to talk about the same subject. Adnan, go ahead, what would you like to say? Adnan, are you there? Let me move on. A big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the MOATS.tv website: James Glass, Alim Khan, Paul Citro, and Hussein Mirsafian, and of course, Vincent Russell, the biggest of them all. Please, thanks very much indeed for those handsome donations, but please do become a MOATS donor tonight. Even if it's £1, €1, $1, give what you can to support the show. Let's go to Cyprus, where our old friend George has something to say. Go ahead, George.
George, hi. It's good to talk to you again. It's been a long time. Basically, the reason why I'm calling is I want to unburden myself with frustration and anger that I'm feeling, and common with a lot of my fellow Cypriots. We've spoken in the past on previous calls about Cyprus's tacit complicity in the genocide that's going on in Gaza, in terms of the use of the RAF bases here, which are in fact sovereign property of Britain, of which we have no control. But just the same, our government could have summoned the Israeli ambassador to say, well, look, what's going on here? I'm being very, very, very tacit about this, but I mean, they could use it, obviously, the diplomatic language to say, look, this won't do. But what do we get? Crickets. The situation that we're now, I think, is developed.
I know that the base is sovereign, George, but the Cypriot government could do many things. I mean, it was a sovereignty that was imposed on Cyprus when it was young and weak as an independent state, and when Britain was powerful. You could now be demanding the ending of this British sovereignty in your country. You could be refusing to collect their garbage. You could be refusing to supply their water. You could be refusing to supply their electricity. You could be kicking out the ambassadors of the belligerent countries. There's so many things that the Cypriot government could do to make this complicity in genocide much more difficult for those involved in it.
Yeah, the thing is, things have moved on a bit since then, because no matter how much as citizens we rally at the gates of the Arcatiri, or the gates of the presidential palace, or the numerous pro-Palestinian anti-Zionist demonstrations, it's all falling on deaf ears. One recently development where a group of people stormed the Limassol city town hall and interrupted a town hall meeting, waving Palestinian flags and carrying placards, trying to make a point. And I think the point is that quite apart from our inaction as a state, there's like a creeping influence, Israeli influence in everyday life. For example, there's an initiative so-called Doing Business with Israel, which is part of a series of fora over the last 5 years. And there's one program to come up soon. I'm not sure whether that will go ahead because the public sentiment is such that they haven't take notice. There was another incident, an event where a primary school in Nicosia, which received some funding from the Israeli embassy, it also received funding from the EU for a green project. Basically, it was a roof garden with photovoltaics and so on. And it was programmed that the inauguration will be conducted by the ambassador for Israel, with all that involved in terms of security checks and one thing and another. There's such an outcry about that again it was cancelled.
Well, look, it's changed days. I mean, I remember when Cyprus was in the advance guard of pro-Palestine solidarity, had one of the best government attitudes to the Palestinian question. The Greek people in total, both within Cyprus and Greece itself, were Arafat's best friend. When Arafat left Beirut in 1982, just ahead of the Sabra and Shatila massacre, where did he sail? Where did he go? He went to Greece. Pompeo was a Western government that was on his then a very rare thing, as indeed it is today. Thanks, George, in Cyprus. Now on the podcast, we've been in the top 60 for politics in the UK this week, which is a very high chart number. If you think how many podcasts, BBC, ITV, Channel 4, all the big media outlets have their own podcasts, we are in the charts at number 60. We're in the top 30 in Singapore, Egypt, UAE, and Thailand. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen. Now, let me get in one more call before the break. It's the one and only Declan in Dublin on Syria. Go ahead, Declan.
It's not good news, George. The former Grand Mufti, whom you briefly met in Dublin and who addressed the Irish Parliament and was sabotaged by Ivana Bacik, the leader of the Labour Party, whose grandfather was a Nazi collaborator in Czechoslovakia and who also spoke in the European Parliament, is dead. He was tortured to a degree you would not believe and that I cannot describe. If I met you face to face, I couldn't even tell you. It's that bad. Gaddafi got off lightly compared to him. They're hunting his children and his grandchildren. And in fact, I have an article in the Strategic Culture Review today on him that Pepe Escobar also writes for, and I mentioned his grandchildren. They're being hunted through the streets of Aleppo, and those who are caught are being paraded naked. Also in Aleppo, there's a lady there I know, a married Sunni lady who's quite well known, and they're chasing her because Moria, like hell, we say in Irish, she won't wear the niqab that everybody else is being forced to wear, but in reality it's to shake her down for money. Dr. Haya Ouli, O-U-L-I, they're chasing her like the aristocracy chase foxes in England. And in Idlib at the moment, there's now over 500 Alawi women as sex slaves and being cut up for spare parts. You will remember MI6 from the Four Seasons Hotel in Damascus are coordinating all of this. And you will remember that when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, we were all shedding crocodile tears for the poor women of Afghanistan. I have most of this documented. I have a small website that I get information from various parties in Syria and outside of Syria. I'm very careful with names and all of that, right? Because even if they're in Western Europe, their relatives will be carved up in Syria if they open their mouths. Not just Alawis, Christians. A church was burned in Homs there the other day. That's, neither here nor there. The Christians, if they pay up, I'll have a chance of not being killed. Right, if they pay up, the Alawi have no chance, and any Sunni who was anyway remotely connected to the government, in other words, worked at a school or anything, is for the chop as well. So that's the situation of the democracy that NATO
Well, it's a very,
brought.
very, very dismal story that you bring us. I was unaware that the Grand Mufti had finally passed away, but from what I know of his injuries, which is, I think, less than you know, it is a mercy that he has passed away. He was tortured so brutally as to be, as you say, indescribable on the air. The Grand Mufti, the Sunni leader in Syria. And of course, that's why they treated him in such a savage way. Because if there's anything they hate more than the adherents of other religions, it's the adherents of their own religion who don't accept their fanatic takfiri interpretation of that strand of Islam that they hate even more. You're right, their slogan was Christians to Beirut, as long as they pay up for free passage, but Alawites to the grave. And it's, I think, a matter of time before a serious civil war situation erupts in Syria. I don't myself believe that, notwithstanding the American ambassador's declaration today that this al-Jolani, the pretender president of Syria, that he is in danger of assassination, and that the allies of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, by which he means himself and the European governments, should get together to make sure that the security of Jolani is guaranteed. But I don't myself believe that this fanatic sect of murderers, throat cutters, heart eaters, torturers, will remain in control of Syria forever, or perhaps for long. Because I have, as you do, the very highest opinion of the people of Syria. They are not the Taliban, and neither will they go quietly into that kind of good night. Coming up after the break, it's Donald Courter, the award-winning journalist, host of The Revolution Report, and documentary filmmaker extraordinary. He's been a guest before. He's always worth watching. You'll know what I mean if you stay tuned. I'll be back in a minute. Tommy in Glasgow is no longer in Glasgow. He's actually in the inner sanctum of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Palestine. Go on yourself, Tommy. How did a Glasgow man get there?
How did I get there? Because you're my leader for Palestine. For years, decades, 5 decades, 50 years or more, you have been championing the cause of Palestine. You know, what you forgot about Palestine, most people don't even know, but you've led people like me. You helped me. Anyway, I was in there today. The first prayer, the second prayer of the day, Zohar prayer, I tried to get in there, and by the grace and will of God, do you know what happened? The Zionist pig actually pushed me. He pushed me away. He said, do you want to have a go? Thinking it was a big hard man with a big gun. Is it a Glaswegian? Yeah, I want to have a go, but I said I want to go in there. I want to go into the masjid, you muppet. Never said muppet, but I said, yeah, I want to have a go. I want to go into the masjid. And he pushed me again. And alhamdulillah, he pushed me again. But anyway, sabr, as the Arabic say, patience, have patience. There's more than one way to skin a cat. I went through another couple checkpoints. One even had the chutzpah to say to me in a funny accent, go back to the UK. Anyway, finally, alhamdulillah, with a bit of patience, sabr, persistence, I managed to get in and read my Zohar prayer by the skin of my teeth. And what a blessed sanctuary it is. And I'm on here to try and encourage many people to come. The Christian, today I went to Bethlehem, Church of Nativity. It was a pilgrimage on behalf of my great grandfather and grandmother, may they rest in peace. And my mother, who's quite sick, and she kept saying, I wish I could be their son. And she was, because in spirit through me, being in there, and these Palestinian people in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, Al-Quds, the suffering and pain and indignity they have to face on a daily basis of how they treat these beautiful people, and they are beautiful people. So my call out tonight to you, our great leader, and what the show, you have decimated the industry of news, the liars, and you're a bastion for truth, and your show, alhamdulillah, all praise for God, and give you strength to carry on, all the great listeners. And I said a special dua, a special supplication for you, George, for your family, for all the listeners out there, for the Muslims. If you've not been to Masjid Al-Aqsa, you need to get your finger out. It's not for Palestine, it's for the Muslim Ummah. It's for the people who are Islamic. You must go. You must go, please, for the love of God, go. Everyone go to Masjid Al-Aqsa. Everyone defend the faith. Fight against the Satanahu, the Satanists that are out there. Defend the holy sanctuaries. Are you there, Christian? Are you there, Muslim? Stand with us. George, lead the way, brother. Alhamdulillah.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
You're watching the mother of all talk shows, coming to you tonight live from Moscow. No animals were harmed and no sanctions were broken in the bringing of this episode of the mother of all talk shows to you tonight. Please note border security. Is immigration out of control? Yes or no? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. And almost 25,000 people have now voted, and the balance is not actually really changing. Now, Donald Coulter is an award-winning journalist. He's an American here in Moscow. That gives him a unique perspective, well, almost unique. There are a few other Americans here, but none so well embedded in the media scene and knowing quite as much as Donald Coulter, who joins me now. Donald, thanks for coming back. I want to talk to you about Russia, of course, but I want to talk to you as an American, first of all. I mean, I'm half of the time quite happy with what Donald Trump is saying, and half of the time scared out of my wits by what he's saying, and all of the time completely bemused at the volatility, the incredible unpredictability of this man. He has, in the last couple of hours, gone from threatening to send Elon Musk back to Africa, cancel his security pass, accusing him of being on ketamine and all kinds of illegal drugs. And just in the last couple of hours, they're kissing and making up.
Right.
Now, if a local fight in a bar can end that way, but when your finger's on the nuclear trigger, that kind of zany unpredictability is quite frightening, is it not?
It is, but first of all, George, I want to say thanks for inviting me on the show. I mean, we've done this through a screen so many times, and it's a real pleasure to have this
so much better
done in person for the first time. But in terms of Trump, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think part of his personality to be completely unpredictable, and I also think part of it is part of his political strategy. You know, obviously I work at RT, and a lot of us were discussing this falling apart of the bromance between Elon Musk and Donald Trump over the last week. And, you know, a lot of people think that it was a political stunt that was planned, actually, between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, that it wasn't really something that was genuine. A lot of people were actually forecasting the sort of mending of this spat between Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
It's hard to see the upside of it, though.
It is, because I also thought, I didn't think it was something planned, because, I mean, of course, we saw Elon Musk saying that Trump was in the Epstein files, and Trump saying that he's not going to give subsidies to the electric cars Elon's putting out. I mean, Elon Musk lost, in terms of stock value, billions of dollars just because of this spat. You know, sometimes I watch CNN just to understand what the liberal media is saying about this kind of stuff, and they brought up a good point.
You do it so we don't have to.
Exactly. But they brought up one good point, that as a result of this spat on Twitter, the amount of money that, or the amount of stock value that Elon Musk lost as a result of it, was so many billions of dollars, the quantity of which only like 14 people in history have ever made in their entire lives. So this obviously did have somewhat of an effect, but again, it's stock prices, and it could be part of a longer strategy. I don't know what the end game could be.
No, that's why we're not stockbrokers.
Yeah, exactly.
But to pursue the point, Donald Trump says he did not know that the Ukraine was going to blow up that railway bridge. He did not know that the Ukraine was going to make a drone attack on strategic bombers that were out in the open as part of the START treaty. They were required to be out in the open so the other side can see from aerial surveillance how many bombers there are and where they are. A serious act of terrorism by any metric. Donald Trump says he did not know about them, but American operatives were undoubtedly involved in them. So the question is, who's running the United States? Plainly, the president, the commander-in-chief, if he did not know of this operation, is being deceived by his subordinates.
Well, I think that has to do with the division between, you know, the elected officials and what people usually call the deep state, right? We've got a whole military bureaucracy that's actually helping Ukraine wage its terroristic war, and the elected officials of the Trump administration aren't micromanaging that. So, and I really do think that Trump wasn't aware of it, because, of course, we started really seeing just how little Trump knows about what's actually going on the ground at the beginning of this revival of the Istanbul peace talks, right? Because basically at the beginning of this second round of peace talks in Istanbul between Russia and Ukraine, we saw Ukraine try to sabotage them immediately, essentially. They have significantly increased their drone attacks on civilian infrastructure in Russian territory. So much so, I mean, obviously Russian air defenses shoot pretty much all of them out of the sky, but I mean, you know, I live in Moscow. I was in the suburbs just several weeks ago, and I heard the anti-air guns going off. That's a reality for people who are living in the suburbs of Moscow and even around some of the airports sometimes. And then, as a result, in response to this, obviously Russia launched military strikes on military infrastructure in Ukraine as an answer to this provocation. And Trump said that because Russia did that, he thought Putin was going crazy. Obviously, he doesn't know all the facts, and this is something that even Vladimir Putin's aides had said, specifically Yuri Ushakov, one of his top aides. He said it looks like Trump doesn't know all the facts if he's thinking that Putin's going crazy over this. But we've been seeing it back and forth throughout these Istanbul peace talks that was started by Ukraine. But you know, Russia also launched a series of strikes recently that Trump commented on, and he said that basically that Ukraine deserved it.
They had it coming. Yeah.
So maybe he's starting to put some of the pieces together at this point.
It's this wild oscillation. You know, one minute he's humiliating Zelensky in the White House, telling him he has no cards. 1 minute he's cutting off military aid and intelligence cooperation. And the next minute he's saying, he said it just the other day to MOATS, We're good with Ukraine. We've got the rare earths and so on. It's difficult to know where US policy is going. It's not that difficult to know where Russian policy is going, is it? Russia is taking the gloves off, don't you think?
I think so, and I think it's, in terms of Russian policy, you bring up a good point. You know, a lot of people that were in political life in the United States and Russia throughout the Cold War understand that Russian politicians, Soviet politicians look at politics and diplomacy as more of a chess game, right? And American politicians tend to look at it in less of a logical way.
Ten-pin bowling.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Less of a logical way and more of a way of how we're going to backstab these guys to get what we want, essentially. And, you know, Trump's administration doesn't seem to be entirely an exception to this, but he seems to be using, in a lot of ways, the unpredictability of his personality. I mean, we've seen that now Trump has come to some sort of agreement with China. At least he's said it officially. We haven't heard any comment from the Chinese side yet.
It might not be true.
Yeah, maybe it's just something he's made up in his own head. But if that's the case, you know, all these weeks of 140% tariffs, 200% tariffs. I mean, you could understand that as a sort of bargaining tactic to try and immediately light a flame under the butt of the Chinese to try and end with a more beneficial rate of tariffs for the United States. I mean, but in terms of the Ukraine conflict, I mean, I really think Trump got into something that he didn't really understand how he was going to be able to handle it. He said he thought he was going to come in and, it's just a war, you know, I'm going to come in and be able to settle this thing, no problem. He didn't understand how seriously, you know, at odds Ukraine and Russia are, how at odds both of their interests are, because Russia has no reason to give up on its goals in the military operation that it set from the start: the neutralization of Ukraine, denazification of the country, and integration of these territories, former Ukrainian territories that had voted to become part of Russia. Ukraine is not going to give up on that. It's made clear. I mean, they still want to keep Crimea, for God's sake. And we've seen attempts by, you know, by the Trump administration to try and have Russia only keep the parts of these territories that are militarily occupied for now by the Russian forces and settle for that. That's not going to happen. You know, Russia doesn't want to keep a sort of Korean War situation for the next 100 years. They need to denazify Ukraine because they see how volatile it can be to have a state like that on its border.
Many Russians say to me here, in fact, that this has to be done now so that our children or grandchildren don't have to do it again.
Absolutely.
That this has to be resolved. These matters have to be settled.
How many countries hostile to Russia are there on the Russian border? There's Poland, a NATO state, Latvia, NATO state, Estonia, NATO state, Lithuania, now we got Finland, Sweden. I mean, where does it end, right? That's, Russia wants it to end in Ukraine.
Tulsi Gabbard, I think, a kind of ray of light in the, or at least intelligence, no pun intended, in the White House, Director of National Intelligence. She was at Hiroshima today. And she spoke what were previously commonplaces, but have remarkably gone out of fashion. She spoke of the sheer horror, the existential horror of nuclear weapons. And yet we have prime ministers, presidents, behaving in such a cavalier way in this conflict, apparently oblivious or careless of what the consequences of what they're demanding and what they're doing could be. I find it quite remarkable. Once upon a time, you know, 1 million people would be out on the march in London, and every one of them would know that there's no hiding place from nuclear war. Whatever they tell you about going under the stairs or under a table, you're all going to die. And yet we've got ministers, prime ministers, presidents, cavalierly careering down the path which might lead there, and they're apparently given a free ride by the media and by the rest of the public, most of the public. It's chilling, isn't it?
I would say the behavior we've seen from Western politicians in that regard is psychotic. I mean, how far are they going to be willing to go to see where that actual red line is? I mean, once they cross it, there's no point of return. I mean, it started with just giving Ukraine weapons, and then military advisors, sharing military intelligence, helping them with satellites. Now, I mean, we've got, there were even talk of sending the regular military from European Union countries there. Now we've got the French government saying that the Renault car manufacturer is going to start manufacturing drones for the Ukrainian military on Ukrainian territory. And we've got, you know, who knows if they're going to be working with some of these so-called civilians now that are being told by the Ukrainian government to produce drones for the war effort as well. I mean, those are, these domestic sort of drone production facilities are going to be legitimately considered military targets according to international law in that regard. I mean, where the red line is, I mean, they keep pushing and pushing, and like I said, the red line for launching nuclear weapons is not one that we can come back from.
No, it's called a red line for a reason.
Exactly.
Now, they want, you alluded to it, they want a ceasefire, and ultimately they want to freeze the line of contact where it is.
Yeah.
Although, be careful what you wish for, because that line of contact is rapidly changing,
right,
more rapidly than at any time in the conflict. Russia is gaining more and more territory. The city of Sumy might well fall very soon. But that's what they're after. And they often refer to Korea. They want to freeze the conflict on a parallel line and keep it that way with two armed camps on either side of that parallel line. You've just recently been to Korea.
Right.
How's that working out, Korea?
Well, I was in North Korea, as you probably
There's only one Korea.
There's only one Korea, yeah. But this is the third time I've been to Korea. This time I wasn't there for that long. I was traveling with the presidential pool of journalists, this time with Sergei Shoigu, because he's now the secretary of Russia's Security Council. And, you know, the correspondence they have with Kim Jong-un, it's not done over the telephone. He makes a visit there, hands him written correspondence, and that's how this is done. But, I mean, it's on the backdrop of rapidly developing relations between Russia and the DPRK. They were always quite good, but they're really becoming close now. First time I was there was during the signing of the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement between Russia and the DPRK, which allowed, according to international law, because of this document, for DPRK troops to participate in the military operation, which we saw in the liberation of the Kursk region from Ukrainian occupation there. So, you know, based on the development of relations between these two countries, it really is something remarkable. Even in the tourist sector, right? The borders for the DPRK are completely closed to pretty much all tourists all over the world, except for Russian ones. And this,
in fact, they're building like holiday camps and hotels for Russian tourists.
They've built an entire huge tourist complex city that they're going to open up soon. And I'm guessing the reason they came up with that is because obviously any foreigner who travels to North Korea, you got to travel with minders that the government gives you. And honestly, it's not like they're spying on you. I mean, I'm talking as a journalist. They're actually very helpful. They never asked to see what I was filming or how I was making my journalistic content or anything. They're just there and they're like, tell us what you want to see, we'll make it happen. And so, you know, I don't really like this word minders that the Western propaganda has come up with. They're kind of just like guides, really. And yeah, like I said, this huge complex is going to be open soon, and I'm guessing it's going to be so that, you know, tourists can go there and enjoy all of the touristic aspects of the DPRK without having to have guides with them or whatever. So it's definitely...
Meanwhile, much to the chagrin of Steve Bannon and co., South Korea has elected a new president who seems to be, well, a little bit different, at least, to his predecessor.
It seems like one of the best, actually, presidents we've seen in South Korea for a while, because the predecessor, I mean, seemed to me, based on what I was reading in the news, as like some Cold War hardliner that I mean, why was he impeached in the first place? Because he declared martial law without really any sort of
he invaded
basis.
The parliament.
Invaded the parliament on the basis, according to him, of a potential pro-DPRK uprising in South Korea. That's absurd. And obviously the South Korean people thought so too, because they've elected a new president who now has a more soft attitude towards the DPRK. They want to actually have relations, work things out. Just recently, his administration decided to turn off all of these propaganda loudspeakers on the border with the DPRK that for God knows how long have been broadcasting. They've been broadcasting not only like some news or propaganda or whatever, K-pop across the border. And you know, that always cracks me up, because K-pop in North Korea is considered so weird. I don't know if you remember, but when the Trump detente in North Korea was happening and there was a little bit of cultural exchange between North Korea and South Korea, South Korean K-pop groups had gone to North Korea to have a concert, and if anyone's watching, look this up on YouTube, you'll find it hilarious. There's footage of these K-pop groups like shaking their butts in front of North Korean auditoriums, and then the camera goes to the North Koreans and they're just watching, they're like, what is this? Like the looks on their faces.
My feelings about K-pop entirely summed up in that. Now, on that subject, you're an American, you're a young one, but you must be aware that a great American died today, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, 82. He had a decent innings considering all the drugs he took. He was a musical genius of a kind that I'm not sure America has ever produced before or since. So maybe a word or two from you about the passing of an American icon.
Well, of course, his music was from a different generation than mine, but you know, music like that is really important to everyone, because music plays the role of soft power in a lot of places, you know. K-pop, for example, we were just talking about, didn't play a very positive role in the North, didn't really work, but you know, the music that people make and the sort of ideology that's behind it, the ideas that the creators bring with them in their songs and their words, it's much more important than just what we listen to, the individual experience we come from it. It defines generations.
Pet Sounds, in my view, the greatest album ever made, even better than Sgt. Pepper's. Now I've set a hair running. Donald Courter, thanks as always for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned. I'll be right back with your calls, starting in Portland, Oregon, with Dennis on Assad in Russia. How fascinating. Okay, I'll be right back. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Coming up later, my interview with Errol Musk. You don't want to miss that. And if you haven't yet voted in the poll, you better do so quickly. Is immigration out of control? Yes or no? More than 25,000 people have now voted in that poll. I'll give you the result later. Let's go first to Dennis in Portland in the United States about Assad in Russia. Go ahead, Dennis.
Well, I was going to talk about Bashar al-Assad disappearing off the radar scope. It's like he didn't exist. Suddenly you don't hear anything about him. You'd think there would be little, dribs and drabs coming out of Russia about it, and being, happily relocated and everything's fine. But he just completely disappeared. So I thought that was kind of strange. But the most important thing I wanted.
That's probably a condition. I mean, yeah, he might well have taken the view that a period of silence from him would be judicious. Or it could be, and it often is the case when political asylum is granted in a country, that a requirement of that political asylum is a period of silence. Of course, that's the right of the country that gives you the asylum. Nobody wants to complicate their own political situation by allowing someone that you've given sanctuary to be making statements, taking actions that might be detrimental to your own national interest. That's all I know about it, Dennis. I know nothing about Assad, where he is or what he's doing. But go ahead if you've got anything to say on it.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is that today in the media, by the way, I'm no longer in Portland. I'm actually in a little town called Pomeroy, Washington, which is almost Idaho. But just to bring up this other issue, I was wondering if you had heard about the fact that Tulsi Gabbard aired this video on her, on her X webpage and on her own personal page about thermonuclear war and the destruction of the San Francisco Bay Bridge. With the Golden Gate Bridge, gets blown up, and it was very disturbing to see that. But I think it's actually a very healthy thing for people to understand. And I saw comments, by the way, where the people excoriated her being a Russian asset and a harebrain and all this other stuff. But it's having been in wearing shoes of that nature.
Look, Dennis, anybody that talks common sense about these issues of war and peace is automatically accused of being a Putin agent. But when you're accusing the director of national intelligence in the White House, in a Republican administration, of being a Putin agent, you see how far that rot has spread. I've referred to Tulsi Gabbard several times already this evening. I thought she did a signal service to Americans as well as to the rest of the world by reminding us of the literally cataclysmic consequences of a nuclear exchange. And I repeat, for those who think that there will be a conventional war in which a nuclear power allows itself to be defeated by conventional means, is living in cloud cuckoo land. That cannot happen. Any existential danger to a nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed superpower has to be dealt with by any means necessary. That's obvious. It would be true in the United States. It's true in Russia. Dennis, thanks for that call. A big shout out to tonight's top donors who've been onto the MOATS.tv website since we came on air. Jamila and Emmanuel, John Carpenter, Ali Materik, and Reinhold Storm, and Amberine Khalil have all given very generously to the mother of all talk shows tonight on the MOATS.tv website. And I'm deeply grateful to them. And I hope you'll join them, even with your dollar, your euro, your pound, after the show tonight. Some comments on tonight's poll. Stefania Brazzi says immigration is out of control because it's orchestrated by the governments that bombed Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and most of West Africa. Well, of course, these points are true as far as they go, but the great majority of people illegally entering Britain are not from any of those areas or any of those countries. They are coming from places where there has been no war and no bombing. Very substantial, at least 1/3 of the people crossing the English Channel in organized crime dinghies are Albanians, and there is no war in Albania. There has not been a war in Albania since 1945. And Albania cannot be a repressive state because it's a candidate member for NATO and the European Union, if you get my drift. Adam in Bedfordshire says, immigration is deliberately generated, so it's not out of control. They will use it as an excuse to mandate digital ID. And H. Agnes P. says, no, immigration is not out of control. The imperialist expansion of aggression and violence to stop sides, sanctions and wars that create those of immigration. Indeed, of course, I agree with every of that, Agnes, but that doesn't answer the point I previously made. Nikki A. says Western governments and militaries have caused immense suffering, death, destruction and misery, causing instability in other nations, which causes people to flee, leaving for somewhere safer. And Chris Cox says if NATO removed Gaddafi from power, the gates to Europe will be open and flooded with refugees, said a certain Vladimir Putin, before NATO did remove Gaddafi from power. Now, on these subjects, let me promote our live event tomorrow night, No to NATO, No to War. British War with Russia is at 9 p.m. on my YouTube, my Rumble, my Facebook, my X account. Watch it live. Two great speakers, Patrick Walsh and Harry Buta. Harry once stood against me in a parliamentary election, and now he's a close comrade of mine. So, coming up in 2 minutes, we've got Errol Musk, businessman, politician, patriarch of the Musk family. But first, Deborah in Blackpool on immigration. On you go, Debs.
Good evening, George. What I'd like to just let you know is, yes, I think immigration is out of control. I don't know if you remember last summer about the Metropole Hotel. Well, there's been even more busloads getting busloaded into the Metropole Hotel. And one of my close friends had been in a really serious car accident, George, and he's 62 years of age, and he nearly lost his right arm, and he ended up, he's homeless. I'm in social housing, and I wanted to let him even sleep in my sofa, but they wanted him to go on my tenancy, which they won't allow, and it's bonkers, honest to God. I'm like, oh my God, this guy has worked his whole life, you know, and he's been on and off building sites, which is another crazy thing, and they take a quarter of the wage for the agency, a quarter goes out to whoever does the paying system, you know, and it's just infuriating, and it just, I don't know, all the immigration.
Well, the world's upside down, Deborah. The world's upside down. We cannot have, the government cannot be allowed to have British people homeless whilst paying hoteliers, corrupt, rapacious hoteliers, £200 a night to put up people that arrived illegally on the south coast, and put them up not for a week or for a long weekend, put them up indefinitely for years at £200 per person per night. We can't have that. It's an extraordinary tribute to the patience of the British people that there are not Ballymena type riots going on across Britain all the time. It shows the truth of what I've always said, that though racism exists in Britain, it's by no means the worst on the European continent, and if you think Britain's racist, you never lived in France. So, tribute to the British people. But enough is enough. You can't have 1,000 guys, and it's almost always guys, almost always young guys, arriving every day in a dinghy and they all get put up in a hotel for years at £200 a night in public money. You cannot possibly tolerate that. It's astounding that it's been tolerated so far. But the fault lies not with the guy in the hotel. The fault lies with the politicians we elected that are allowing that system to continue, and continue over many years and different parties in government. Keir Starmer says he was going to smash the criminal gangs. When are they getting smashed, Keir? More likely you get smashed than you smashing the criminal gangs. It's intolerable for a variety of reasons, and money is only one of them. If you put a couple of hundred 20 and 30-year-old guys, single men, in a hotel, in a community, what do you think is going to happen next? Inevitable. I don't need to spell it out to you, especially as you're a lady. You know what's going to happen. 200 single guys in a hotel, in a community. The whole question of alcohol and drugs and girls and boys and crime, it's inevitable. And so, for the sake of social peace in our country, for the sake of the safety of the refugees themselves, we need a different solution to this, and we need it now, because the height of the summer is not yet upon us. And at the height of the summer, that 1,000 a day might become 1,500, might become 2,000 a day. And we never know when the straw that breaks the camel's back is going to be loaded. Thank you, Deborah. I'm sorry for your friend's troubles, and I hope that he can improve his situation. Now, look, I interviewed Errol Musk this morning just before he flew out of Russia. I told him that I'd always just seen him as Elon Musk's father. But the TED talk, or rather Fred talk, that he gave at a conference I was at in Moscow this week was mesmerizing. Musk Sr. was charismatic, informative, and above all, understandable on subjects that are not everybody's everyday breakfast. I started by asking him about longevity, which featured heavily in his talk. Here's what he had to say.
What I found was, towards the end of last year and earlier this year, I had people approach me to talk about if I would be their frontman for a longevity promotional series of I suppose television. I don't know where they put it. And I said, sure. So I went in, and at that time, I didn't really know what they meant. I'd heard the word longevity, of course. So I didn't really know what they were talking about. But since then, from South Africa, where that happened in Cape Town, to California, where I met another group of people doing exactly the same sort of thing, I learned what longevity means. It's a new study of humanity that came about because you can now map the human genome. You can now look at someone's DNA, and with machines that have been developed in countries like Germany, that will tell you from a simple 5-hour examination what this person is predisposed to in life in terms of illness or whatever. And it's quite extraordinary.
And then avoid the kind of behaviors that might bring those pre-existing problems.
Yes. So these longevity clinics are opening up all over the world. And the cost of doing these sort of tests, of course, were a few years ago prohibitively out of the question. But now, a professor from China was telling me $100 in China. I know it's $1,000 in San Francisco, and it is $2,000 in South Africa. So
So still out of most people's range.
Yes,
but not in
2,000
China.
is way out of people's range. $1,000 maybe better, and but $100 in China. And the people in California were telling me it won't be long before it will be less than $100 in the US. So and people are advised to go start their longevity examinations at the age of 14. So I learned all this in the last few months.
It's amazing. I mean, you're a pretty good poster boy for it, because I was taken by one of the things you said in your talk, that you still fly airplanes.
Yes.
Although you added the caveat, albeit a bit more carefully.
Yeah, a bit more carefully than I used to. Yeah.
How does an 80-year-old get behind the joystick? That's amazing.
Well, flying an airplane is like riding a bicycle. So I've been flying for 54 years now, I suppose you could say. Yeah, 54 years. So I've had about 40 aircraft. So over the years, So you learn to fly. I managed to get my license in the prerequisite time and everything, but I wasn't what you'd call a natural or anything. I had to really work hard at it. And but as you fly, as you go on, it becomes a second nature, but a bit like flying, driving a car, riding a bicycle.
Now, it must be in the genes, because your son went on to be, in a way, the most famous spaceman since Gagarin. How did all that happen? What's the fascination with rockets?
Well, obviously, I grew up in the era of Sputnik.
Me too.
And so,
I still hear the Tornadoes number, Telstar.
Yes.
And it makes me enormously nostalgic.
I can even sing that.
You and me both.
Yeah.
I tell my kids I like the next bit, before the key change.
Yeah. Anyway, so I grew up in that era. And of course, we considered ourselves special and fortunate and to be able to be in that particular era, which was, we just sort of grew with it, we just grew with it. And I was even on the Moonwatch team that the Americans employed local people in our country, I imagine everywhere, to map the movement of satellites, timing them and everything. Now you got $1 a night in those days for most of the night, $1. Which is a huge amount of money at the time, by the way.
Wow.
You could buy a jacket for $1, And so, of course, when the children came along, obviously, being an engineer myself, I would talk to them all the time about these sort of things, and they were very interested in it. So it was just a natural continuation. What happened with Elon, though, is he was not particularly into tech. He started off totally in the work. Well, he became very computer literate at a very young age, maybe 11, 12. But because I bought him a real computer from IBM at that time. But later on, he went on to do putting the newspapers onto the internet. Then he did PayPal. And after selling PayPal, he was at a bit of a loss as to what to do. And because all of a sudden they had PayPal bought out from underneath them for a large sum of money. And then to fill his time, he started flying, doing his twin rating, twin engine rating. And at the same time, he saw that there was a sort of club in San Francisco called the Mars Society. So he went to a meeting of the Mars Society, and he was immediately taken by it and thrilled by it, and enthralled by it, that people were actually living, some had already been living for 3 or 4 months in sort of pretend Mars, sort of little houses
in the
desert of California, pretending or practicing, let's say is a better word, to be on Mars. And they were seeing how much water they needed and how much food they needed and what they could grow in the environment that. So he was just taken up by this. He couldn't believe it. He was totally thrilled by this, so much so that within a week or so, he gave this little society $100,000, of his earnings from PayPal, and that really helped them get on the map as well. And then he immediately said, I'm going to launch a rocket. I'm going to find a rocket. Came to Russia to see if he could buy one. Because he had no idea what like me and you, we might do the same.
Where to start, yeah.
Where to start. And he came here. I know that later on in recent years, the head of Rosma, the
Rosmonaut Institute here.
Yes, the Russian Space Institute here said we're sorry we didn't listen to him, but when he came and he said he wanted to buy a rocket from them, with the idea of sending something into space, they really thought he was off his head or something, Anyway, he then realized they're not going to help him. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time. He'd insisted that I come over to live with my family to come and live in Los Angeles. And so he told me he's rented a warehouse, and it was probably the worst possible warehouse in El Segundo that you could get. The lights were all falling out. The place was flooding. The floor was cracked. Electric wires were running all in the wrong places. Carpets tiles were missing. It was a mess. And I took on the job of trying to make the building better, and got a little team together. There were about 9 of us. I got a few Mexican helpers and everything. And we started putting this building back in shape. Today, that building, it looks like the interior. If you go inside, it's like a hospital intensive care unit, with enameled floors and all that sort of thing. And it was, in fact, used for making the film Iron Man as a set,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where they do R&D at the moment for SpaceX in that building, because now they've moved on to a large place which produces boosters in a continuous fashion, like they used to produce Model T Fords,
like a rocket road.
It's like an auto plant. They make them, they roll them out. They roll out the boosters, and they were making, up till recently, they're making 4 rocket engines a day.
Wow. Yeah. Now, one of the mesmerizing parts of your talk was space-time travel.
Yes.
Everyone knows about space travel. Everyone knows about time travel. But you introduced a note of skepticism. Again, give us the 2-minute definition of that.
Okay, space-time travel is moving in the 4th dimension. So, although people don't realize it, I use the example of light. So when a photon of light leaves a star, we are told that it takes sometimes a few years, or sometimes even 1 million years, to reach us. And it travels through space. This photon travels through space much like a little vehicle going through space. Well, that's not true. The photon travels in space-time. So there is no time and there is no space. It's a 4th dimension. So it leaves the star and arrives here instantaneously without losing any energy. It arrives here. It hasn't changed. It hasn't been bumping into anything on the way. The space is not entirely empty, by the way. And it reaches here without the elapse of time from the point of view of the photon. So that's traveling in space-time. Now, the 4th dimension. Now, Minkowski and mathematicians like him 100 years ago, Minkowski was the mathematician who put Einstein's theories into mathematics and into mathematical form. And he devoted his life after that, of his time with Einstein and with many other mathematicians, to understanding space-time travel and encouraging us 100 years ago that we must look at space-time travel as a means to reach the stars. So if you were able to, in as much as people 200 years ago would not understand a cell phone, we at this point in time are somewhat unable to understand space-time travel, but we will understand it. And space-time travel, of course, is also tied up with gravity. So if you understand space-time travel, you would also be able to eliminate gravity from your the things that are putting you forcing you to stay on Earth. So, in fact, even in the production that you and your colleagues were produced for the Forum of the Future, where you showed the new cities that Russia hopes to build, I imagine, and then you showed in the videos on the screen vehicles moving slowly in the air around the city, but up in the air. That's just make-believe. But that's assuming you're saying to people, we have conquered gravity. Those vehicles are able to move without worrying about the weak gravitational force. And so we haven't done that. So that's just imagination at work. But in reality, we must find the solution to that, because we see it and we know, especially as an engineer, you know that in due course we will be doing that. And to do that, we need to start applying ourselves to study it more seriously than we are at the moment. So most universities and places around the world are still stuck in conventional studies, but we need to move to the study of these things that Minkowski and his colleagues were busy with 100 years ago. And luckily enough, Minkowski and his colleagues have left us a fine collection of papers on space-time travel. So it's available. It's not like we're starting from scratch. We actually have. And Minkowski maintained that the answers are written in math. So mathematicians, just as we found that energy and mass are the same thing, we found that out in mathematics. Through mathematics, we found that out. No other way. Before 1905, all the scientists in the world agreed that the sun is made of coal. No. Yeah. So if you went to a university prior to 1905, doesn't matter where you went, Heidelberg, Berlin, MIT, or wherever it was, you were told the sun is a huge ball of coal that's on fire. And that's why we get heat from it. I mean, it's preposterous now to think like that. But that's what people were taught, because there was no way that anyone could understand what else it could be. You understand? So along came this young man who got a second-class pass in physics, which was not enough to give him a position at a university as a lecturer. That's Einstein. And so he got a job at a patent office where he had lots of spare time, apparently. And he set about putting his ideas of relativity into what he could do in his in the level of ability he had at the time. And he came up with a 2-page essay paper, which was only 2 pages, the special law of relativity. And he sent it with a colleague of his. If you read the autobiographies, he sent it with a colleague to Heidelberg University because he didn't have money for postage. And when it got there, within 2 or 3 months, 2 months, all the universities in the world knew that the sun is actually energy and mass, mass turning into energy. Hydrogen forming helium, and in the process releasing mass as energy.
And not a lump of coal.
And not a lump of coal. So that's just an example of what we didn't know. Yeah. And in the same way, space-time travel is something we don't know, but somebody, somewhere, some geeky hamburger munching, Coke drinking, Coca-Cola drinking nerd will tell us.
Now, we're in Moscow now, from where they first reached to the stars. Sputnik,
yes.
Gagarin,
yes.
The failure to recognize the inherent ability of your son, Elon. How different life could have been if they'd taken Elon under their wing, and SpaceX could have been a Russian thing. Yeah. But they reached for the stars here first. And you said somewhat controversially in the English press, I wish I had said it, that Moscow is the finest capital city in the world.
Yes,
the problem for the newspapers is that is indisputably true, as anyone who's walked through these grand avenues already knows. Give us your reflections on.
Well, yes,
on Moscow.
I arrived in Moscow a week ago, as I was invited here, and of course an invitation I simply could not resist. And of course I had the media movie impression that Moscow is like dark alleys and sort of brick buildings that are very questionable and dark windows and people in the shadows with long coats on and guns and knives and all that sort of stuff. So that's sort of in your head, and smelly and or something, or everything unpleasant or sort of not unpleasant but spooky, And so I was quite amazed when I arrived in Moscow and drove in on the long drive from the airport to see what was, to my mind, the most beautiful city I've ever seen. And having now seen much more of it, I've seen a great deal of it now because I was on the river last night for a long trip. And of course, many, many other trips around on the cars, in vehicles around the city. This is by far, not by a little bit, this is by far the most beautiful capital city on earth. There's no question in my mind.
None at all.
Not a iota of question about it. This is by far the most beautiful capital city on earth.
Yeah, this is something that more people need to know. And yet the vilification of Russia, the conference we were at, for example. Yeah. I didn't sign their declaration because there were some things in it that I couldn't put my name to. But it's described as far right.
Yes, that's ridiculous.
When they were proselytizing for more children.
Yes.
For a tackling of the demographic
living spaces.
Yes. Bigger houses for families.
Yes.
Free.
And how houses should be designed for families to make living easier.
It just shows how
the populations need to be sustained properly. And there was I saw that far right. I thought, these people must be desperate. These media people to describe this as far right.
Well, it's now moved into the ether and therefore is everywhere forever. You and I will forever.
I don't think people are that stupid. I think these days, since 2015, before 2015, I was taken in by the media. I only started, I used to watch CNN. I can't believe it. It's just that around about 2015, I started to see things on, say, CNN, which didn't make any sense to me. I thought, well, that can't be right. And, common sense started to kick in and it's grown. But not only with me, but with many people. So it's not as though we are where we were. We are now in a world where certainly people are far more aware and informed about the issues, and particularly in the United States, where they really didn't give a hoot about it as long as they were making a good income, a good living. The people are now aware that they had a bad government, and they realize that now with Biden.
Yeah, and that the media lied to them. About it. You've got to fly. So, last question. About 2 hours ago, Elon Musk expressed his regret at some of the tweets that he issued against President Trump. You approve of that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
How do you explain what happened? It was almost a supernova of hatred.
No, I wouldn't say hatred. I would say irritation with the situation. Not hatred. I don't say hatred. No, look, they had a year, I was going to say maybe 3 or 4 months, but it's actually a year of intense involvement, trying to get rid of the opposition, which has now been scattered. The opposition is not only gone, it's scattered. It doesn't exist anymore. And the arena was finally cleared of all opposition, and it was just the two of them. And
almost like two men in one of these space pods.
Yes, that's right.
All the way to Mars.
Very good, very excellent, very, very good. You can't put 2 people in a space pod for 6 months, or 4 people would be even worse, and expect them all to come out on the other side alive. Believe me, I've done a lot of yachting. Taking 4 people across an ocean on a yacht It takes a very, very good skipper, a very good captain to keep the order, you know. Anyway, yeah, so, yes, I think that having cleared the arena of everything except themselves, they were still in the mode of get rid. So they decided to get rid of each other. but that's what happens in all human relationships. Be it if you're a committee member at a club. I've seen committee members at golf clubs want to kill each other and say, "I'm going to kill you," over some small change, if you know what I mean. So it's the stress that people build up, and that has to find an outlet somehow. You know, in the years gone by, it was, "I'll meet you at 5 a.m. with swords or pistols." You know what I mean? Which was equally stupid. And yeah, so I don't think anybody should lose any sleep over it. I think that these are two incredibly capable men, my son and Donald Trump. So we can look forward to good things.
You think the relationship can return safely back to
Well, I don't. I think Elon's done his job in government. I see them more. It depends on what comes up. He's not going to join with a suitcase or a briefcase and go into the office every day. That's not going to happen. But if a position of some sort or a task of some sort should show its face, he will very likely be called in, and they will try and help each other, you know. I've got no doubt.
Phones are ringing, I think, for your car to the airport. It's been fascinating.
Thank you.
Almost as fascinating as your TED Talk, which I commend to everyone to watch. It's available online. Great to meet you.
I must just say, I was very impressed to see you, after when I finished that talk, stand up, because that...
I gave you a one-man standing ovation.
Well, you did, but actually a few other people did as well, but you stood up first, and I actually told my colleague afterwards, George Galloway stood up for me.
And I know a thing or two about public speaking.
I actually said that. And he knows a thing or two about public speaking. That's what I said, actually. Yes.
Fantastic. Great to meet you. Safe journey.
Thank you very much, George.
By Gayatri, not for a social media roundup tonight because of technical reasons, but a resume of the week that we have had here in Moscow. Gayatri, not since Mick Jagger have I seen an 80-year-old get the rock star treatment that Errol Musk got in Moscow. People are following him around everywhere. To what do you attribute this?
He had heavy security with him all times.
Skin to skin.
To make sure that the mob didn't get close to him.
Yeah.
Well, it must be the name. He gave his son the name, and his son in return gave him the fame, no?
Oh, what a good line. Yeah, that's exactly it.
But actually, there's more to him.
There's much more to him than that.
Now that we've met him and we spent time with him at the forum, there's actually so much more to him. He is, as you concluded, having seen his TED Talk, he was talking about space, about time, journeys, gravities. He was talking about skippers, captains in the ocean, things that we don't think about, things we don't often talk about. And that was so beautiful about the forum. There are all these speakers, and obviously Errol Musk being the main
Russia's main asset right now.
Exactly. It gave us so much food for thought, and it was so mesmerizing, wasn't it? Because it's such a subject so far away from us. But he's so right. I mean, 100 years ago, they would never have imagined everything would be on this phone, on this little device, in our pockets, but
40 years
access
ago.
to everything. Exactly.
The moon landing, if it ever happened, had less computer power than is in your individual telephone.
And yet, in the UK, in Western Europe, we see riots going from one place spreading across the countries. We see the economy even worse. It's spreading to New York City now. What about that, Donald Trump, your own stomping ground? We see the economy sinking, society falling apart. And here we are at the Forum of the Future, 2050, projecting how this country can be like, technologically wise, but also where they will stand in 2050. Well, I don't think our people in the UK are even thinking beyond
5:30.
Exactly. So I thought that was wonderful and very refreshing about the forum that we attended this week.
Was terrific. And the one thing that nobody could contest in what he said was that Moscow is, by some considerable distance, the most impressive capital city anywhere in the world right now. Would you agree?
Of course, absolutely. We mentioned, we discussed this the last time we were in Moscow and broadcasting from the studio, that not only is it very beautiful, it's historical, it's grand, it's basically a Mayfair throughout Moscow, and the most important thing, no menace. So it's absolutely safe around here. You feel safe around here.
Yeah.
You can't see.
I mean, it's like the Champs-Élysées, like Mayfair, but going on indefinitely.
Yes.
You can go on a very long drive, and the architecture, the quality of the buildings, the cleanliness of the streets, you know, just how banal is this point? But I have not seen one single pothole ever in Moscow, and yet we can't drive into town.
You know, I think that when Russians and Chinese especially come to the UK and they see a campaign taking place, and on the leaflet it says, "We'll take care of your potholes," they say, "What do you mean we'll take? Why would someone pledge to take care of your potholes? It should be automatic." They don't think about that here. It's standard procedure. So at the forum, they were displaying with the use of AI how Moscow could look like, how Russia could look like in 2050, with, as Errol Musk said, flying vehicles. Although we need to still
we have to conquer
gravity first. But much of what was displayed is actually China today, isn't it?
Yeah, they showed a futuristic cityscape, and I said to the Chinese academic next to me, "That looks like China today." It's been marvelous for us here in Moscow. I hope the show was marvelous for you, and if it was, come back at the same time on Sunday for the mother of all talk shows. Thanks for watching, and look out for the clips. Some of them are pretty spectacular. It's going to be a good show on Sunday. The one and only Roger Stone, right-hand man to Donald Trump, right-hand man to Richard Nixon, and former convict. He's our special guest on Sunday. Tune in. You'll like it.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.